Hello, so this is a sociology revision video, and in this video I'm going to be talking through functionalist explanations of crime. To begin with, we'll start off with Durkheim, who's writing in the late 19th century. Durkheim, as a functionalist, believes that everything has a function, for the upkeep and the running of society, and that includes crime. So, crime, Durkheim argues, is inevitable and it can be functional. It can have some kind of positive impact for society. So, what does Durkheim mean by this? He means that uh, crime can cause social change. So, for example, if we think about the civil rights movement in America, if we think about the suffragettes in the UK, these are groups that were breaking the laws in order to cause social change. So, civil rights movement in America, people doing sit-ins, for example, were breaking the law of the segregation laws, and that led to those laws changing. The suffragettes campaigning for women's rights broke the law, and that led to the women getting the vote in 1918, 1928 in the UK. So people breaking the law can cause social change. If people weren't deviant, if people didn't deviate, if people didn't break the law, there wouldn't need to be changes, would there? There wouldn't need to be new laws in place. So crime and deviance can create societal change. On a more practical level, crime creates jobs. So if nobody broke the law, there wouldn't need to be police officers, there wouldn't need to be judges, there wouldn't need to be lawyers, there wouldn't need to be prisons, there wouldn't need to be prison officers. The list goes on and on and on. So crime creates jobs. That's another function of crime. However, Durkheim does say that too much crime creates enemy. So it's about this balance between enough, a kind of healthy amount of crime that can cause social change, create jobs, etc., and a kind of unhealthy amount that leads to the breakdown of social order. Durkheim and functionalists also are really interested in the value consensus, this idea that everyone in society agrees on what's right and wrong. And here's another function of crime for Durkheim, that crime and the reaction to crime can cause social cohesion. It can kind of reinstate the boundaries. So, for example, if there's a large terrorist attack, often society comes together and there's kind of events where there might be an event, where people kind of come together after the event and show kind of solidarity. So it can bring people together. If there's a large scale crime, it can bring society together. It can also set out the boundaries. So if somebody commits a crime and that's reported on in the media, and there's a kind of backlash against that, people are really unhappy about that crime, then that can reinstate what the boundaries are. How should we behave? So talking about evaluation of Merton, not Merton, sorry, Durkheim, is that there isn't really any thought here of the victims, is there? That Durkheim really isn't interested in the not really interested in the power here, not really interested in victims, not really getting into why it is that people commit crime. So there's a lot of work left to be done, and this is really just the starting point in the late 19th century of sociology talking about crime. Okay, I mentioned Merton just there. Let's go on to Merton, who really takes it up a notch. Merton's key idea is strain theory, and this is an absolute classic study in sociology. And what strain theory is all about is the idea that we all have cultural goals. So again, this idea of a value consensus, what we want, and Merton argued that everybody kind of agrees on what we want. So money, house, material possessions, those kind of things. So they are the cultural goals on the left-hand side here. The institutionalized means of achieving those goals are the way to get those things. So the institutionalized means are going to school, getting a good job, working hard, getting wages to pay for those things, to pay for those cultural goals. So if you accept the goals and you accept the means, you conform. So this is people who get a job, they work, and they get the nice house, they get the car, etc. There are other other aspects of this, but really the one that I'm going to focus on is innovation. This is really key for students of sociology, crime, and deviance. And what Merton argues is that these are people, the people who accept the goals. So they want the house, they want the car, they want the material possessions, but they reject the means. Okay, so they innovate. So this is where it's really interesting for us as sociologists talking about crime and deviance. So by innovation, that is people who find new ways to get the goals. So it could be drug dealing, it could be fraud, it could be burglary. And if you think about what do those people spend their money on, it's the same things. It's material possessions. So they, for Merton, they are going after, they're accepting the goals, but they're going after it in a different way. They're innovating. Okay, they're rejecting the means. Perhaps they've been forced to reject the means. So in terms of evaluation, what can we say about this? As I said before, Merton assumes that we all have shared goals, that we all want the same thing, which is not necessarily true. I mean, somebody might have other goals, they might have other priorities, they might want to just help people rather than want material possessions, for example. Also, it's quite deterministic. Not everybody who doesn't have the institutionalized means necessarily is going to innovate. They might not do that. It also doesn't explain all crimes. Really, it's talking about crimes for financial gain. It doesn't explain vandalism, for example. It doesn't explain violent crime either. However, you could say it is still relevant. It does apply. If we're talking about people involved in criminal gangs, for example, then it does explain that to some extent. So that's a kind of positive evaluation there. Okay, so just got two more key studies. The next one is Cohen, Status Frustration. This was written in 1955, and this is the first of the two subcultural theories that I'm going to talk about. And what Cohen argues in this book, Delinquent Boys, The Culture of the Gang, is that crime is a result of status frustration. So it kind of adds on to Merton. It's not just about the goals of society. It can be a reaction to people who lack status. So particularly young working class men, boys, who don't have status. They don't have economic status in society. They don't have political status. They don't have perhaps academic status. And so they turn to crime to gain status. So by joining a criminal gang, for example. And this does explain, unlike Merton, crimes that aren't for financial goals. So non-utilitarian crime. So like vandalism, status frustration does explain that people act out to gain status. And again, it could explain kind of criminal activity of gangs, for example, of young working class men joining gangs to gain status. However, if we talk about the evaluation, is it deterministic? Are all young working class men who lack status going to turn to crime? That's not the case, is it? So perhaps somewhat deterministic. What about crimes of the powerful? It doesn't explain white collar crime. It's not really talking about that, but we can't explain white collar or corporate crime through status frustration. It doesn't talk about female crime, so women committing crime. Either. So there's a few gaps here, but you could see it is very useful. It's adding on to Merton. Okay, the final one that I'm going to talk about in this video is Cloward and Ohlin talking about illegitimate opportunity structure. So this is really a combination of Merton and Cohen. So what it's talking about is, as the book is titled Delinquency and Opportunity, and it's really talking about kind of criminal gangs, and it's saying that for some people to achieve the goals of society, there is an illegitimate opportunity structure which provides that kind of status and the opportunity. And so this is, if you think about it, it's kind of joining a gang where you might start off by doing small scale criminal activities and then building up into larger scale and eventually kind of running the gang. It's like an opportunity structure. It's a kind of step ladder to achieving the goals of society. So for some people, particularly working class youth, male youth, it's it's this kind of illegitimate opportunity structure to explain the crime of these working class youth. In terms of evaluation, it doesn't talk about middle class crime. So crimes of the powerful, white collar, corporate crime, doesn't explain that. The other thing I thought of when I was looking at this just now is you can maybe link it to Sudhir Venkatesh, the study of Gang Leader for a Day, which really does talk about the structure of a gang almost being like a kind of corporate structure where people work their way up. So the kind of street drug dealers start off and then work their way up to the kind of upper echelons in the hierarchy of the gang. So you could you can make that link in an essay, if you're talking about Cloward Ohlin, making that nice link to Venkatesh and talking about how it's still relevant in the modern day. Okay, I hope that was a useful run through of the key functionalist explanations of crime. If you've got any questions at all, please leave a comment and I will do my best to respond. Thank you for listening.